Eric Idle is like Brendan Fraser's samurai warrior teacher,
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yep.
which just involves throwing rocks at him mostly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, oh my god, this movie.
Welcome to 99 at 25 for August 16th through the 31st, 1999. The dog days of summer, and boy howdy were these ever dog days of summer. Living up to the hype by being pretty goddamn boring, but we're going to have fun with it anyway. Joining me this time is old friend of the show, back for like round 5 or something, Julia Sirmons. Julia, how are you?
I'm doing good. As I was mentioning before, I'm moving house, which
Always
is
fun.
always
Everybody's favorite.
fun,
Yep.
and always involves revisiting the DVD collection
Oh, that's cool. Yep.
and finding things you haven't seen for 5 years, but then also thinking about it, and then ultimately deciding you absolutely cannot part with any of it because you might need it someday. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you still have a DVD player, like a thing that
I
plays
do.
the
I have a DVD player, and I have actually a European DVD player, like
Oh,
a
I'm jealous of
region.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is like, it's basically you just buy a region, whatever it is, region 2
Yeah.
DVD player, and then you like get an adapter and just plug it into your, and there, like that's all it is. Like it's no big secret mystery how to do it, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it is a nice bonus to have.
I should do that. I just like I'm such a streaming like whore at this point where I'm just like I don't want stuff hooked up to my TV and I don't like have a separate DVD player. I have an Xbox that sometimes plays DVDs and sometimes doesn't depending on like its mood, but
Oh, really?
yeah, that's
Because I
pretty
was
much it.
because we have an X. No, I don't think I have a PS4 now, and I was thinking,
Oh.
should I just get rid of the DVD player and just stick with that? But maybe not.
Maybe the PS4 is better. We have an Xbox One. It has a Blu-ray and DVD player, and just sometimes it's like, yeah, I'll play this, and sometimes it's like, try putting it back in 9 times, and I'm like, okay, I don't know. Seems like an awful lot of
Not
work for little reward, but yeah,
It's not gonna let you watch things it deems unsuitable.
yeah. Like my Lord of the Rings Blu-rays, it's like, nah, and I'm like, come on, I paid a lot of money for these. Look at how pretty the boxes are. Don't you want to play it? It's like I don't want to play it. Fine. I don't understand why they don't have like DVD players and Blu-rays in the TVs now, like on the side. Just stick them in the side, right? You
Like
should
the
have
old
that.
school little television with the VCR player, and they
Yeah,
just,
yeah, right.
yeah.
I feel like there should be a slot next to all those HDMI things where you just like put a DVD in and you can play it on your TV. It seems like a thing that should have happened by now, but I don't know. It sucks. Anyways. Did you find any good ones that you're like, oh, this is a keeper. We're keeping this.
No, I absolutely. There's no way. I absolutely will need it, all of these at some point in my
Mm-hmm.
life. I found a box set that I bought with my stipend money from my postdoc fellowship.
Uh-huh.
That's just like Italian movies from the 70s that are all about like the left wing terrorism, or left wing and right wing terrorism that was going on in Italy. So they're all movies about that, which I seem like would be cool to watch. Could be a
Yeah.
mixed bag, but
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I
Yeah.
totally forgot I had this thing. So thanks to Columbia and to Scarecrow Video in Seattle.
And those are not available on Tubi. So
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff that you can't.
yeah.
Well, you'd be surprised what you can get on Tubi
Tubi's
sometimes.
ridiculous. Yeah, the like
Yeah.
random shit that's on Tubi is like always astounding to me. As long as you're okay with occasional commercials, which I'm pretty much am most of the time. I don't care.
Speaking of 90s experiences, I was on a road trip last week, and I caught like there was cable in the motel room. and I caught like the last 2/3 of Cape Fear on cable with
Oh,
commercials.
that feels very 90s.
Yeah, it was incredible. It was just like sugar rush of nostalgia.
It has that sign outside that's like, we have HBO.
Yeah, yeah,
No,
exactly.
that's awesome. Was it on like an old television or was it on a new television?
It was on new television,
I feel like I
believe it
had
or
to,
not.
it would have to be like one of those boxy TVs to really get the full effect, but still,
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. I have not. I don't think I've seen Cape Fear since like around the time it came out. it's been a
so
really,
good.
it's been a really long time.
Yeah.
Um, it's a remake too, right? Is the original good? What's the original? I should know this.
Embarrassingly, I have not seen the original, but I've heard it's good. But it's interesting because like everybody who was in that movie has like a cameo in the Scorsese version, like Martin
Right, right,
Balsam
right. Yeah.
and Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's like grizzly Robert Mitchum in his 70s. It's great, great stuff.
Yeah.
De Niro just
Yeah.
going completely bonkers, just like
That's so fun. I because when people talk about like the best remakes, I would assume Cape Fear must be like up there, but nobody ever really brings it up.
well, also like the a thing that's cool about it is like how much it is referencing Hitchcock and like Hitchcock thrillers,
Yeah.
and like a
Yeah.
lot of the imagery and the like kind of suspense and stuff is like
Yeah.
so that like if you're a film person that adds an extra dimension of like Scorsese doing his homage to cinema thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is really his
Yeah.
bag.
Yeah. Well, we'll be revisiting Bringing Out the Dead at some point in the near future, so I guess I'll try and get Cape Fear back in as well and rewatch the more forgotten '90s Scorsese's movie uh, canon back to back. But yeah. All right. Well, anyway, speaking of Scorsese, that's a good transition point. Um, boy, so all right, if you're old enough to remember this, back before when movies were just kind of released whenever with no real logic to them, the last couple weeks of summer were when studios were like, let's see how this does, and would put out a movie that probably wasn't very good, but maybe some people would like it, and it might pick up some of those like lingering box office dollars at the end of the summer. So you have like these movies that come out that seem like they are. I mean, usually it used to be like the fairly big, high profile, relatively big budget movies that they knew were going to fail, right? And like, boy, is this a collection of those.
It's a quartet of stinkers.
Yeah, well, there's like the diversity of the movies that came out in the last couple weeks of August of 1999 is pretty astounding. But one of the things that sort of unites them all is none of them have anywhere even close to like a fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So these are all like green movies. And one of them, the highest rated one, gets a 53%. So these are all movies that are like either critically derided or split, right? So they're like 50% or less in terms of critical approval, or just like utter disastrous failures on every front, but like in an interesting way.
I'm
Um,
assuming that 53% is for Dudley Do-Right.
it's 100%. Yeah, you got it. Yes. Oh, sorry. No, that was 98%. I forgot to do right. Um, Yeah, so we start with one that we have covered on the show. I think the only one that we've covered on the show so far, which a movie that like I really like a lot, and we liked a lot when we did our episode on it, and that is Mickey Blue Eyes, directed by Kelly Macon. The other big Hugh Grant rom com ish thing that came out in the summer of '99 after Notting Hill. And the reason why I said speaking of Scorsese is because a lot of Scorsese or Scorsese adjacent people are in it. Half the cast of The Sopranos is in this movie, which is very funny. But it's Hugh Grant, James Caan, Gene Triplehorn, Burt Young, James Fox, Joe Vittorelli, and then Vincent Pastore, of course, from The Sopranos. Frank Pellegrino, Scott Thompson, John Ventimiglia, who played Artie in The Sopranos. Yeah, listen to our episode about it. It's a it's a tonally all over the place weird movie about James Caan and Hugh Grant falling in love with each other. And have you seen?
I saw it when it came out, but I've not seen it since. But
Yeah, yeah.
historically, it's important because it was like part of the Hugh Grant renaissance and him kind of like being rehabilitated by kind of just embracing his inner weirdness. And I feel like
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
the fish out of water element of that movie, especially, was a kind of like a shoring up the Hugh Grant persona that kind of redeemed him.
yeah, and like I mean, because Notting Hill used it incredibly well and is a great movie. But you're right, like this is him kind of doing. He's like letting loose. It's really showing off his comedic skills. Like he's very very funny, and it's a kind of a perfect like display of his comedy. Um, it is like one of the funnier performances that you can find of Hugh Grant, and it's a genuinely like charming, weird, offbeat little movie. As long as you're not expecting too much from it, but yeah, we had a great time with it. I'm a fan. It's quite quotable. Yeah, off to a good start. And then directly into not such great territory. Because also August 20th, the directorial debut and also finale for Scream screenwriter Kevin Williamson, a movie that was disastrous for a lot of reasons, starring Katie Holmes, Helen Mirren, Barry Watson, Jeffrey Tambor, Molly Ringwald, Vivica A. Fox, Michael McKean, and Leslie Ann Warren. That is the movie that was retitled Teaching Mrs. Tingle from the title Killing Mrs. Tingle. Now, there's a reason why it was delayed, dumped at the end of the summer, and retitled Teaching Mrs. Tingle from Killing Mrs. Tingle. And that is, of course, because of Columbine. So this, like, sort of, bad and also grotesquely tasteless movie has largely been forgotten and, is the second best Katie Holmes movie of that year after Go. I have to admit that I never saw this, but I do remember the pretty shocking amount of backlash that came with it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it either, but it does seem to have been like kind of a pioneer in the like, uh, got this steaming pile of trash. Let's just put Helen Mirren in it and
Yep.
she'll class up the joint.
It is interesting in the sense of it being one of the attempts to make Barry Watson into a movie star, which didn't work. But that's pretty much it. I can't think of like another movie he did after that. He just kind of went back to Seventh Heaven and then kind of disappeared off the face of the planet. There was a New York Post article on August the 30th titled "Ticked Off at Tingle: Teacher Backlash Against Message," which includes a quote from the National Education Association spokeswoman Kathy Lyons, who said, "We find it very upsetting right in the wake of the Columbine shootings, Miramax would release a blockbuster movie featuring kids torturing their teacher. We object to entertainment geared towards kids that tells them that violence is a way to solve their problems." So
Yeah, we really just lost our minds after Columbine, It's just like almost a preview of what happened with 9/11. We're just like, what, can we show this? Like, we can't
Yep.
show this, like
Yep.
this is too much. And like, just, yeah, huge backlash about what's appropriate or not. And just like,
Yeah, and also like the movie came out 4 days after Columbine High School went back to classes. So like it's pretty terrible, pretty bad timing. However, this is Miramax in the 1990s, and we kind of know what's going on behind the scenes there anyway. So maybe not entirely surprising that
level of cultural sensitivity that's in the workplace.
not high, not
Yeah.
high. Also that weekend, Universal Soldier: The Return, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, Michael Jai White, and one of my favorites, Xander Berkeley, although I'm not going to see it just because Xander Berkeley's in it. This is an interesting movie. I think this has like a 3% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It is very much not liked. But I did find it interesting because I think this is the last. This is kind of the end of Jean-Claude Van Damme's run as a major action star. By the early 2000s, he really kind of disappears. Like the whole Jean-Claude Van Damme movie thing, like ceases to be a thing. We know he had issues with substance abuse and some other things going on in his own life. But in the sort of opposite Hugh Grant kind of way, right? Jean-Claude Van Damme had a bunch of awesome action movies in like the mid to early 90s. You had like Hard Target and Sudden Death and like a bunch of really like great ones. And then he does the one with Dennis Rodman, and then he does Universal Soldier 2. And then everything kind of falls apart for him. But it does seem like a fitting sort of like end to,
Yeah, no,
to the Jean-Claude Van Damme reign.
he really had a good run there. Why did people feel like they needed to make movies with Dennis Rodman back then? That was like a thing, I
Ooh.
think.
Well, listen to our episode about Simon Says, starring Dennis Rodman and Dane Cook, and we talk all about that. 1999's worst movie by
Yeah,
a long
that
way.
is top of the queue, top of the podcast queue.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. No, it's a good episode, but we do talk a lot about the whole Dennis Rodman phenomenon and the whole idea of like him being an action movie star, and what a weird idea that was. It is it's a movie. It counts as a movie. That's all I will say about Simon Says, parentheses, 1999. All right, a more interesting failure, August the 25th, a movie called In Too Deep, which I had completely forgotten about. But once I looked into it, I'm like, oh, I remember this existing. And it kind of sounds interesting as a bit of a time capsule. It's a Dimension Films release, which always was appealing to me in the 1990s. Directed by Michael Reimer. Reimer had done a couple of movies at this point, none of them especially mind-blowing, but would shift to a pretty successful television directing career a couple of years after this came out, after directing Queen of the Damned, the terrible adaptation of the Anne Rice novel starring Aaliyah and Stuart Townsend. So Reimer would then go on to direct a bunch of episodes of Battlestar Galactica, The Man in the High Castle, Jessica Jones, Hannibal, and The Killing. And so he made quite a name for himself as a TV director. In Too Deep stars Omar Epps, LL Cool J, Nia Long, Stanley Tucci, Hill Harper, Pam Grier, and then also a whole bunch of like random people from the music world, including Jermaine Dupri and Maya and Nas. So there you go. You ever seen In Too Deep?
I have not, but
Yeah.
based on what you're telling me, I'm very interested to now know what episodes of Hannibal he directed. I guess I could see Queen of the Damned to Hannibal. I guess I could see that.
I'll say this, like Queen of the Damned is a terrible movie, but like there are redeeming things about it. Like there's some choices that are made in that movie that are actually like pretty interesting and clever, and sort of surprising. Ultimately, it's just sort of like it didn't have the studio backing it needed, and like Stuart Townsend. I mean, Stuart Townsend is a fine actor. Like he's fine. He's not a bad actor at all, but he's not Lestat.
Yeah.
Like, and you don't go from like notably Tom Cruise, like very high profile Tom Cruise, to like, all right, Stuart Townsend, pick up where Tom Cruise left off, and let's see if we
Yeah,
can
and
make this work. So
there's so many great British actors of his generation that, have more going on than him that you
yeah,
could have picked.
I mean, I feel like once Tom Cruise is passed on the sequel, like just don't make it. Like you're not gonna. It's doomed at that point, right? Because like anybody you pick is going to look like a downgrade because you couldn't get Tom Cruise to make the
Right,
sequel
right.
to the movie. So that's not really Reimer's fault, but regardless, that seemed to have been like the last straw for major Hollywood productions, as far as he goes. Speaking of failures, and people who aren't making movies right now, John McTiernan releases his second movie in just a few weeks as the 13th Warrior is released just a few weeks after his Thomas Crown Affair remake is also released, starring Antonio Banderas, Omar Sharif, Tony Curran, Clive Russell, and a bunch of other random people. This is one that, like, since we've been doing the podcast, a bunch of people have brought up to me as something they're interested in talking about. Apparently, it's something that has gotten a lot of like revision in the last several years as a movie that like still is kind of a failure, but it's much better than people think it is, and like you can see the potential of it having been something good. But you know, there was apparently a great deal of disagreement between McTiernan and the studio.
Yeah, I watched it and I found it kind of fun. It's so like the weird thing about it is it's Beowulf, except they just decided to tack. It's like based on Michael Crichton book, and instead of
Right.
Beowulf, it's just like I'm also going to tack on to Beowulf this story about this. I guess it would be present day Iraqi warrior who ended up like traveling with the Vikings, and just like Michael Crichton deciding, Beowulf, give it a B plus, needs a little special sauce. We're gonna
Needs a Muslim warrior played by a notably Latin actor.
in
That's
eyeliner.
that's how you make Beowulf better. Wait, so is it really like based on Beowulf? Is it like a
Oh yeah,
Grendel and everything? Like it's like a
there's a
like a
Grendel.
monster?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
uh,
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting. I thought it was a much more of a straightforward like Viking epic with the sort of like Muslim warrior twist thrown into it. I didn't realize there was like fantasy elements to it.
Yeah,
So
well, it's just like really trying to do both things, and that's sometimes kind of fun and sometimes weird. But it does have some elements I really enjoyed. It's kind of like this medieval swashbuckly.
hmm.
There's a lot of it, like you can see. It's weird. I don't know if you had this in your notes, but like McTiernan directed a lot of it, and then Crichton came in and directed parts of it again.
Right. Yeah.
So it's got this little feeling of like, oh, here's somebody who really knows how to direct action, and then there's like, oh, here's somebody who writes books, layered on top of it.
Here's someone who
So
writes books and denies climate change. Let's see
yeah,
what he has to say about it.
so
Yeah.
there's some really visually like beautiful and like fun stuff going on.
Okay.
Um, and it's just yeah, it's kind of like I think an interesting failure with potential. Um, is how I would describe it. Worth a look. It's only an hour 42 minutes.
Yeah.
What do you got to lose? We should
Yeah.
also note that it was the movie that made Omar Sharif quit making movies, at least for about 5 years.
That and lung cancer, but like, yeah.
Yeah,
Didn't he die of lung cancer like shortly after this? Maybe he
that's
didn't die of
stale.
cancer. I can't remember, but he died. He was like pretty freaking old by 1999, right?
Yeah,
Like, yeah,
looks good though. I will say that about this movie.
that is
You
true.
know,
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I
Antonio
gotta watch it.
Banderas. Yeah,
I gotta see it. Um, yeah, I even remember seeing the poster for this and being like, "Oh, that looks like my jam." I'm like, like a Viking warrior epic thing, and then seeing the release date, and I'm like, "Oh, August 27th. It's probably bad." And like, there you go. That's how predictive those late August releases used to be, kids. You could just tell by the release date that a
yeah.
movie that looked like maybe it would be cool wasn't going to be cool because it was coming out in late August. So, speaking of movies that seemed like maybe they were going to be cool but weren't, The Astronaut's Wife, starring Johnny Depp, Charlize Theron, Joe Morton, and Clea Duvall, as well as Nick Cassavetes, and some other people. And a movie that I also have never seen because everybody told me not to. So,
I also have not seen it.
okay, good.
Um, I have as someone who was a teen girl in 1999, I do have some hair and fashion notes in here. So like if you see the poster, like Charlize Theron has this very like cropped,
Yes.
short pixie cut that I think they're having her do it here because of the association with Rosemary's Baby. Um, and like having it be
Right.
like a creepy thriller, your husband is gonna do bad stuff to you. Um, but I just like to say to my fellow wavy, frizzy haired people, you cannot maintain this haircut. You can have other short haircuts, but you cannot have this one. Don't try it at home. It's too much work. It'll end in tears. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I speak from experience indeed from 1999 exactly.
The poster's cool. I will give it that. It's a neat looking poster. It seems like we did a lot of work on that and nothing else. So two things about this. One, people forget that Johnny Depp was also going through like a career low around this time. Like Pirates of the Caribbean was sort of Johnny Depp's renaissance, and that was a couple years out. Johnny Depp was making movies like this and like The Ninth Gate, and a movie called Nick of Time around this period, right? Do you remember any of those movies? Well, Ninth Gate was
Polanski, right?
Polanski, yeah.
Mhm.
And Nick of Time was a weird movie he made with like Christopher Walken, which is set like in real time over the course of 2 hours, and it's like a race against the clock terrorist thriller movie, like 24 before 24. But yeah, after sort of the run of the Tim Burton movies, Johnny Depp was not really a movie star. He wasn't really bankable for quite a while, and then Pirates of the Caribbean happened, and he had this like resurgence of his career, but also kind of sucks as a person. So there is that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the other person who I think is interesting here is Clea Duvall, who is an actor I like a lot. Clea Duvall was in a lot of movies in 1999. So she's in this. She's all that. She's in a movie called A Slipping Down Life, which sounds interesting. I've never heard of, but has a great cast. She's in But I'm a Cheerleader, and she's in Girl Interrupted. So, pretty big year for Clea Duvall as well. Next up on the list, A Dog of Flanders, a remake of another movie with terrible reviews, starring John Voight and Cheryl Ladd and some other people. Nobody cares. The one we've been waiting for, your favorite movie of the year, Dudley Do-Right, also August the 27th, the big Brendan Fraser movie of 1999.
Where do we even start with this? Because even
Start with Alfred Molina and Eric Idle are both in it for some reason, and then kind of
yes, and Eric Idle is like Brendan Fraser's samurai warrior teacher,
correct. Yep.
which just involves throwing rocks at him mostly.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god, this movie. Well, something I didn't realize is that I mean I don't know how much we should explain like what Dudley Do-Right is, like where the IP so to speak comes from, but
It's the same as the Rocky and Bullwinkle, right? Like that
right,
universe, right? Yeah.
it was all part of the same like TV show for kids in the late
Right.
50s, early 60s, and Dudley Do-Right specifically was this like brave but moronic Canadian Mountie who it was all based on like silent movie stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and like he had this nemesis brought vividly to life by Alfred Molina called Snidely Whiplash, who was like literally twirling his mustache and tying women to railroad tracks, and it was like that level of plot line. And in the year of our Lord 1999, we decided to make a live action movie of it.
Yeah. And well, so like Dudley Do-Right, the character, was kind of a parody of like the Lone Ranger, right? Like that's kind of what the idea was, that it was like the Canadian Lone Ranger, and that's a funny concept in and of itself. right? Sorta. And yeah, so like a lot of things about, I mean, as dumb as it seems, like a lot of things about it should have worked. Like those cartoons are great. The Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons are great. Like that whole world is just great. It's a lot of like, it's very, very fun, good comedy. Uh, Hugh Wilson, who wrote and directed it, had just made the same, well, within the same like year. They were both released in the same year because he also wrote and directed Blast from the Past with Brendan Fraser, which is also a really great movie. And like they worked really well together, and he got a really great performance out of Brendan Fraser. And Brendan Fraser was also in George of the Jungle, which is also of the same sort of, from the same universe. And like that was great. George of the Jungle is a great movie. Like
Oh,
that
yeah.
that movie worked really well. But this sort of seemed like it was trying to re-find that magic, and like, and I mean, Fraser is perfectly cast. If you're going to cast a human Dudley Do-Right, like this era of Brendan Fraser is sort of perfect. But yeah,
And he is kind of perfect in it, actually, but it's
yeah, he's wonderful. He's very funny. Like his physical comedy is fantastic. It always is. But like, yes, everything about this movie is just sort of like head in your face in your palm.
yeah, it's a tight 1 hour 10 minutes. um,
is that all it is? Really? Is it only
yeah,
a
because if you take out the fractured fairy tale short at the beginning and you
okay?
take out 5 minutes of credits, like that's what you're left with.
Okay, that
Um,
seems longer than that if I
it
remember it. But
seems a lot longer than that. um, yeah, and it's just like nothing happens, and then also way too much happens at the same time.
yes,
You
that's
know,
it's a
we
fair way
have
to say
a
it.
we have like an art contest where uh Brendan Fraser carves a portrait of Sarah Jessica Parker out of a hedge. We have
Right? Yep. Yep. Yep.
several kind of jaw-dropping portrayals of Native American performances and powwows and things.
That's also one way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, this
True.
is this like feather and sequins Cirque du Soleil version of an Indian powwow, and everyone just thinks it's like this is like the greatest thing we've ever seen. Ooh ah! And you see like these faces of little children in the audience, and it's like meant to convey the idea of like, oh, they're having a cross cultural experience and they're learning about stuff from this like ridiculous casino version of somebody's idea of something. I don't know. And then there's this other weird joke that all the Native Americans are actually Jewish.
This is not just you like making things up about a movie. Like this is all true things that have
No,
actually
I
like
couldn't if I tried.
occurred,
Yeah, and like
within this movie. Yeah.
the guy who played Mo Green in The Godfather, he's like the head Indian chief.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's 70 minutes long, and they managed to shoehorn in a cameo from Regis Philbin and Kathy Lee Gifford. Like
Yeah,
that's what we're talking. Like in a movie about like the Canadian frontier. Like that's what we're talking about, right? In
yeah.
terms of like where this movie is shooting. Anyway.
It does. I will give it this. It does have one great line in it, which is Brendan Fraser says to Sarah Jessica Parker, "This is Canada now. Things are real here."
um Well, two minor coincidences. Well, first of all, as I said, like Hugh Wilson and Brendan Fraser made a much better movie that year that you should go see instead of this. But also, like Eric Idle appearing in two 1999 movies that like lampoon Canada is a really weird coincidence. Because he, of course, is in this and South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut as well. And both heavily feature like jokes about Canada. it's like a main feature of the movie. So interesting choice for interesting choice for Eric Idle's 1999 filmography. But There you go. Anyway, if anybody's a big fan of Dudley Do-Right, please do write in and tell us why. Okay, the highest reviewed movie is not actually Dudley Do-Right of this list. It is the next one, that is Albert Brooks's The Muse, a divisive movie within Albert Brooks's writing and directing canon, starring Albert Brooks, Sharon Stone, Andie MacDowell, Jeff Bridges, Stephen Wright, Mark Firestein, Bradley Whitford, Jennifer Tilly, Rob Reiner, Wolfgang Puck, James Cameron, Martin Scorsese, him again, Lorenzo Lamas, Skip O'Brien, Stephen Wright, Bobby Edner, Stacey Travis, Steve Valentine, Greg Grunberg, and Stephen Anthony Lawrence. So there was a couple, like, Albert Brooks made a couple really, really great movies in this period of time. I really like Mother, which is a couple years, I think, after this came out. I think this was leading up to that one. I haven't seen The Muse in a long time. I was on like a really big Albert Brooks kick, like, for a while, around that time, and I really liked this. And I don't know if I'd still like it, but I don't know. It's very, like, it's indulgent. It's kind of overstuffed. It, like, obviously there's way too many people in it, everything else. And, like, I like Sharon Stone around this time as well, though. And I thought this was good. Plus Jeff Bridges, I'll watch anything Jeff Bridges does.
Yeah. And he just looks so handsome in this movie.
Yeah. It's a good year for him between this and Arlington Road. Like, he looks really good in.
Yeah. It was a good vintage.
It really was. It really was.
I really like this one as well. I was charmed by it. I think I would have liked to see more of this Sharon Stone, like doing more kind of screwball comic, a kind of lighter side to her, because I think she's really good at that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is in that kind of mid period Albert Brooks, like the Mother, which I also love, like him entering a kind of like less edgy and more mild kind of self-deprecation, and kind of facing middle age and just being generally perplexed by life. And like the thing that keeps getting said about him in this movie is that he's losing his edge. And, that idea of like the fear of losing your edge at a certain time in life, I think is actually very touching and real in a kind of otherwise fanciful story.
Yeah. I think that's sort of like what almost like, that's what makes it kind of charming, is that it's like there's a little bit of meta commentary there, right? That, like, it is Albert Brooks, like, sort of seeming to have lost his comic razor wit or whatever it is, right? And, like, kind of working through that. It just feels like a very, like, authentic movie in a weird way, and I think that's part of, like, what works about it.
Yeah, and I'm a sucker for the kind of like Hollywood Insider, like, hey, it's that guy comedy. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of great bits with that, like Brooks thinks he has a meeting with Spielberg, and it turns out to be Spielberg's brother, played by Stephen Wright.
Yeah. Which is a great gag in and of itself.
And obviously Wright does a great job with it. But then you have all these little cameos of all the other famous directors who are coming to visit Sharon Stone the Muse. And so, like, James Cameron comes and he's like, no more water. And then the Scorsese one is by far the best.
Yeah.
Do you remember this? His ideas?
Yeah.
Raging Bull, but with a really thin guy. Thin and angry.
Yeah, I gotta watch it again. I now that we've kind of talked about it, I kind of want to do, like, we've never done, like, for podcast purposes, like, putting two movies together that, like, don't see it. Like, I would love to kind of watch this and, like, Bowfinger, like, in the same sitting, and have a talk about sort of where they overlap, because there's like a lot of similar sort of demons being exorcised, and a lot of a similar sort of place where the comedy's coming from in both those movies. But and they both came out in August of 1999. So there you go. But yeah, I'm looking forward to rewatching it again when we have not done for the podcast. So, yeah, I'm glad you still like it, and that I'm not alone in thinking that it's actually quite good. Last one is the U.S. release of a movie called The Very Thought of You, which I also had not heard of, but like a couple interesting things about this movie. It's directed by someone named Nick Ham, but written by Peter Morgan. I'll talk more about him in a second. Starring Monica Potter, Rufus Sewell, Tom Hollander, Joseph Fiennes, and Ray Winstone. Love all of them. That's a cool cast. So Peter Morgan, this is one of his like earlier screenplays, but he went on to do some pretty high profile stuff. He wrote the Gary Oldman adaptation of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy that came out a few years ago, and is also like the guy responsible for writing the Netflix series The Crown. So he sort of, made an award-winning name for himself after this. This apparently is not a very good movie from what I've seen of the reviews. It's just sort of meh. But yeah, I kind of had watched those actors pretty much do anything. So maybe I'll get around to watching that at some point. You ever heard of this movie?
I am trying to remember if I've seen it. It seems very familiar.
Yeah, it does like ring a bell. I definitely haven't seen it, but I think I might have like remembered being aware of it when it came out. But
and I think I was probably too young to fully appreciate Tom Hollander at that tender age. But I definitely post Shakespeare in Love. I definitely would have got to see something with Joseph Fiennes in it. So I bet I did see it, and it's just a blank in my memory.
I'm pretty sure it was released in the U.S. because of Joseph Fiennes. I think like this because Shakespeare in Love, its box office carried on into '99 pretty well. So it's only been a few months since Shakespeare in Love has been like not in theaters anymore, and I would imagine they're trying to capitalize on some of that sweet Joseph Fiennes money. But I can't confirm. Anyway, that's what's going on in the movie theater. What's really happening in the movie theaters at this point is that people are still seeing the Blair Witch Project, and it is still the talk of everybody. In August, it's carrying on its sort of like viral campaign, and also of course The Sixth Sense. Like those are the two movies that everybody is going to see in August, and why most of these movies were sort of overlooked entirely. Because they're killing it at the box office at that time. Okay, so we have a couple other like fun pop culture things to talk about. There's really not much else going on in the world at this time. Like the world seems to have taken a break from having big disastrous events take place, which is like weird, but whatever. It's August. Everybody's tired. 99 had a lot of like earth-shattering events that happened, but for some reason August is kind of boring. But there is a lot of new music that comes out in August. We get new albums from Ludacris, Mary J. Blige, John Mellencamp, The Melvins, Jethro Tull, 3-6 Mafia, Chris Christopherson, Michelle Ndegeocello, Puff Daddy, POD, LFO, Elton John's soundtrack to The Muse. Speaking of The Muse,
Wait,
Filter.
what?
Yeah, Elton John wrote the soundtrack to The Muse. Did you not know this?
No, I feel bad now because it sounded a little rinky-dink to me.
I completely had forgotten that too, and I like looked it up, and I was like, it's like The Muse with songs by Elton John. It's like an Elton John album called The Muse, and it's there you go. Filter, Feist, Rammstein, Megadeth, and Evanescence. But the big ones, August 24th, Christina Aguilera releases her self-titled debut album. It will become one of the best-selling albums of the year and sell over 14 million copies. So we've already talked on the show about how Genie in a Bottle is like everywhere all the time in the summer of 1999. And this is the day that Christina's full album is released. But also that day is the full album of a song we talked about, I think, last episode, even though the song that would take over the world was not released as a single yet and had not been a hit. But also August 24th, Lou Bega's album, A Little Bit of Mambo, featuring the inescapable Mambo number 5, also, graces the world with its presence on August the 24th. You have any fond Mambo number 5 memories, Julia?
Um, I think there was a time when I didn't hate it.
That's what we were saying. Like we didn't hate it. Like it was a catchy little bop for the few months that everybody was weirdly obsessed with it. But like, yeah,
yeah. It is like one of those like, I mean, this happens in every decade, I think, where like something kind of retro comes back into pop music. But like, like after the swing dancing stuff of like the slightly earlier 90s, and like was this weird little moment where it's like, oh, we're going to be retro and a little fancy.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But yeah, it just became relentless
It
rather
did.
quickly.
I think you're right that I think some music executive, because like Lou Bega was like an obscure European artist, right? Who's like not from anywhere in America, and he's German and has like his parents are like, one of them's like Italian. I've looked this up before. One of them's Italian. One of them's from like somewhere in Africa. I can't remember exactly what the origin is, right? But like he's not a Latin guy. He's definitely like a guy with like a little bit of flair, but like he's not Latin. So there's something like weirdly even like contrived and inauthentic about the sort of mambo that is being put forth. But I also think some record executive was like, well, contrived inauthentic swing music worked a couple years ago, so like maybe this is what the kids are going to be doing for 3 years at nightclubs in LA, like mambo music. Let's see what happens. And then you get like a big hit out of it, but then like the mambo revival does not
Not.
take place.
We're not dancing in the gym like West Side Story.
But would that we were. That would be so
no kidding.
that would be so cool. Can you imagine like people just walk into like swingers, but it's like mamboers? No, we talked about, I mean, because we also have 2 movies from 99 that heavily sort of double down on the swing sensation. The aforementioned Blast from the Past, which has like a lot of swing music and swing dancing in it for whatever reason. And then also the movie 3 to Tango, which has no tangoing or dancing of any kind, but the entire soundtrack is like nonstop swing music and like Big Bad Voodoo Daddy for some reason. So,
well, now that you're telling me all this, there's like a strand of Italian pop music that's like, I don't know, interpreting Latin American music, and
yeah.
now this all makes like perfect sense to me now that you say it. I know why this exists in the world. It's like, oh yes.
Lou Bega was really big in France, so there you go.
When have they been wrong?
Eggs. When have they been? That's exactly right. When have they been wrong? Okay, on August the 31st, this is also a big one. The formerly Dixie Chicks release the follow-up to their breakthrough album, Wide Open Spaces, the album Fly, which featured Cowboy Take Me Away and Goodbye Earl, and debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Country Album charts. The Chicks would continue to be huge until being canceled by right-wing snowflakes a few years later for stating an opinion about George W. Bush publicly. The fallout from which is the subject of the terrific 2006 documentary Shut Up and Sing by Barbara Koppel and Cecilia Peck. Do you have any Dixie Chicks feelings, and have you ever seen Shut Up and Sing?
No, I didn't know about it at all, and now I really want to see it. I mean, at the time, Goodbye Earl, yeah, that was a real teen girl favorite in my
Teen girl who wanted to murder their boyfriend favorite.
Yeah, well, my particular teen girlfriends, we had when we were even younger, listened to the soundtrack of Chicago with the Cell Block Tango, and he had it coming. So we had already introduced the men murdering into our
Very
music
great.
mix. But yeah, so Goodbye Earl definitely was a big hit that I definitely remember. But then I remember more of them in the post 9/11 period and the
Mm-hmm.
backlash and stuff. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Shut Up and Sing is really, really good. It's a really good sort of portrait of them as artists, but then also like it sort of weirdly captures a moment that keeps being like a lot of great documentaries, right? Like keeps being like newly relevant for different reasons, like every year, right? And so it's like it's one of those movies we just talked about, like on my other show we just talked about Jesus Camp, and it's one of those movies it's like very weird to be watching in the future.
yeah,
um and I've seen it twice. I watched it again recently because I think it was like on like You're Wrong About, they were talking about the whole thing with the chicks and everything else, and I was like, I want to go back and watch that movie. And like it is, yeah, it's like really startling to see like all the things you kind of forgot about was happening with the culture at the time. And then like when people talk about like cancel culture now, and it's all coming from the right, like saying that it's bad to cancel or whatever, and it's like the only major artist who's like ever been successfully canceled in any meaningful way, like you did it. And it was because they said something bad about George W. Bush while he's like engaging in a fake war. So you can miss me with
yeah,
that bullshit. So yeah.
yeah. The Chicks were also very instrumental in trying to free the West Memphis Three.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
good people.
They are definitely good people. And yeah, great documentary. Go see it. Also, August 31st, the debut album from pop singer Vitamin C, featuring the single Graduation Friends Forever, which wisely was released as a single in March of 2000 so that it could circulate enough to become popular around the time of, graduations, at which point it was everywhere all the time. You just made a face when I mentioned Vitamin C and Graduation Friends Forever. Was that your graduation anthem? Is that your jam?
No, because I didn't graduate that year, but I kind
Yeah.
of remember like wishing I was so I could participate in that song.
I don't get a song.
There's
Bullshit.
that one, and there was like the Baz Luhrmann wear sunscreen one. I
Oh
forget what
God,
year
yeah,
that
yeah,
was.
yeah, 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 yeah. But that wasn't like a graduation song. That was just lifted from a commencement speech that somebody gave, and then like Baz Luhrmann like found it and had somebody like, yeah, and like made a weird song out of it or whatever. I don't remember that being like something that was like heavily associated with actual graduations. Whereas like the Vitamin C song was like,
Yeah, yeah,
it was like the graduation, and then for some reason they made the Green Day song Time of Your Life, like that was the next big graduation song after that, even though it's not
which is
necessarily,
the better song.
yeah, it is I don't know, Vitamin C is kind of cool. I thought she was kind of rad.
She
But yeah,
was. I'm trying to remember her other songs now, though.
I forget them too, but I remember them being pretty decent, like boppy pop songs. For my generation, the graduation song was Sarah McLachlan's "I Will Remember You," like ubiquitously until Vitamin C came along and challenged "I Will Remember You" for the crown of the song that you sing sadly when you graduate from high school or whatever. But I'm not sure that Sarah McLachlan like had that in mind. She wrote
Yeah,
that song. Whereas like Vitamin C is like, I'm gonna cash in on this lack of good graduation themed pop songs. Ha ha ha
yeah,
ha. Okay, big bit. So this is like really the only major big moment in culture at this time. We got two more little points to make, and this is the big one. August the 16th. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire airs its first episode on ABC with Regis Philbin.
Hi, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to Sunday night at Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
It is almost impossible to explain to people now what a big deal Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was, and how it completely like changed the way that we think about game shows entirely. Were you watching Who Wants to Be a Millionaire with the rest of America?
Yeah, I watched some of it for sure, but it's like it was almost like osmosis. Like you didn't need to watch it to know what the setup was,
Yep. Yep.
what the questions were.
Yeah.
I think now that you mention it, I think I watched it with my grandparents a lot, and
That
it
sounds
really
right.
filled that niche of like the show you watch with your grandparents,
Yep.
which
Yep.
is a niche that needs filling for sure.
It wasn't, yeah, and it wasn't just appointment television. It was also like what you're saying about it is absolutely right. It was like you would hear about it on the news the next day. Like it was insane. Like there would be like a local, like if you're listening to like your local like pop radio station or whatever, when they're doing their like rundown of entertainment news, it was like it was telling you like what happened on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire the previous night, that sort of thing. It was, I mean, there's a time around this within a couple of years where like American Idol was the same way. Like you didn't have to watch it, you knew everything about it because like everywhere was just talking about what was happening on American Idol. But yeah, it was like I watched it in college with like my college roommates all the time. It was like just like weirdly addicting, and the reason why is like it was a pretty like straightforward trivia show. There's nothing really spectacular about the format to it or whatever, but like it was the dangling of $1 million that made it, which in 1999 money is like the equivalent of like $3 trillion now or whatever, right? Like that's what made it so compelling. And then there was a bunch of copycats. I remember Fox had a show that was actually really good. Like it was a really well crafted and designed game show called Greed, hosted by Chuck Woolery, like around the same time. But it was like a prime time game show that was like big on production value and that sort of thing. And then NBC did a few years later, like Deal or No Deal, and and we sort of take for granted now the existence of primetime game shows, but like they didn't really exist until Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Game shows were always like daytime TV and or like just pre-prime time, i.e. Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune and like Win Ben Stein's Money. But the idea of like a massively big production value, you can win millions of dollars game show, that we see all over the place now, like The Wall and that sort of thing. Like it starts here, and it was huge. It was like just everybody watched this show for like a year and a half and then kind of got bored of it. And then of course it got its own movie with the Slumdog thing. So
Right.
one Best Picture. Yeah. August the 26th, WWF SmackDown airs its first episode on a network called UPN, which no longer exists. In this episode, Triple H, a person I do know who that is, was challenged to defend his title by The Rock, who I also know who that is, who would alas go on to lose. This was before The Rock was Dwayne Johnson and a movie star. He was The Rock and a guy who did WWF. But interestingly, 1999, also the year The Mummy came out, and of course, The Rock broke through as a movie star in the sequel to The Mummy, The Scorpion King, where he played the titular Scorpion King for about, 3 minutes, and then it's just bad CGI. But still, that was his big crossover into mainstream cinema. I've never watched WWF or anything, but I do remember people being super into SmackDown for whatever reason.
Well, I think that was another thing like you didn't have to watch to know about. Like, like, do you smell what The Rock is cooking? Like, I know I heard that all the time. I'm not sure I even knew what it referred to, but you definitely heard it a lot.
You did. And like I heard of Triple H. I was like, yeah, that's a guy whose name I know is a thing. And even like growing up, right? Like I never watched a minute of wrestling growing up, but I knew who like Jake the Snake Roberts was, and like who, Hulk Hogan obviously was, and like what's the guy, Macho Man Randy Savage, all that sort of thing. it is one of those weird bits of culture that just like forces itself upon you, whether or not you partake. Because I suppose it is larger than life, and that is the idea. I do have like a lot of people that I think are really awesome and respect who just like love wrestling, and I'm like, it's cool that you love this. I'm like, I'm mesmerized by it, but I can't get there. I can't see the appeal.
As someone who studied theater,
Yeah,
I do really find it interesting.
yeah,
Like as a form of theater
yeah.
and like performance, it's like it is really fascinating. But I don't know if that interest is enough to get me to watch it regularly. But I'm in the same boat as you with like a lot of extremely cool people I know are very into it. And Glow is a great show.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, and stuff about wrestling is really interesting. I still haven't seen the Iron Claw, but I really want to get around to watching that at some point. I'm interested in the culture and everything else. I also think that like I don't think a lot of Americans know what pantomime is, like in the UK. But like, if there's an American equivalent of pantomime on like every level, it's professional wrestling. Like everything about it is like the idea behind pantomime like become American. It turns, because it's all like macho and violent and everything else, but it's the same basic concept. It's this like over the top semi participatory, like, suspend disbelief, right, like form
Yeah.
of theater. And I think that's just like that's a pretty fascinating contrast
I'm
between
like, ooh, here comes the big bad
here
wolf.
comes the bad guy, everybody boo, and it's like, yay kids, good job.
That's a
But
great comparison.
it also gave us John Cena, who is an American hero, so can't be all bad. We got John Cena out of the WWE, and The Rock, who's okay sometimes. All right, lastly, and this is just something that I read and I was like, I remember when this happened. One of the world's newest countries votes for independence from Indonesia in a referendum. That is East Timor, and East Timor would become its own country in October. The reason I remember this is that in October, I was in a history course of some kind. It was like a history course. But it was like a political, like a politics. It was like a international relations kind of course. It was all about like Israel and Palestine for the most part. I can't remember what it was called, but anyway, the professor was like, "Who knows what the newest country is?" And everybody was like, I don't know what you're talking about, because it's before social media, so this sort of information wasn't just like jammed down your throat. And he was kind of disappointed that nobody in the room knew that East Timor had just become a new country. And he's like, "It's East Timor," and we're like, "Where's that?" So anyway, I found out that East Timor had become a country, where East Timor was, why it had not been a country, and luckily I never forgot about it because we felt so embarrassed and sad and upset that we let him down by
Yeah.
not knowing about East Timor. But there you go. It votes for independence August the 30th, 1999, and thus ends the month.
It's like for 2 weeks where nothing really happened, we we managed to milk a lot out of it. I'm
A lot
proud
of
of us.
bad movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of bad choices, and Lou Bega.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Brendan Fraser, God bless. Glad
Brendan
you're
Fraser.
glad you're doing better now.
Yes, I'm glad things are going well for him now. There are these like ever rumbling rumors about making another Mummy movie, which like would be great. I'd love to see it, but we shall see. No, but I'm very happy with the Brendan Fraser renaissance, and we are on record as Brendan Fraser fans on the show. So thanks for like bearing with me through the boringest 2 weeks. Well, I'll have you back, and we'll do a much more exciting 2 weeks. Things get really interesting in like November and December when people start freaking out about Y2K. So that's when you really want to go back in time to 1999.
All
But
right.
go watch Shut Up and Sing, and let me know what you think. Anything you wanna sort of say about yourself before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, you can just find, occasional writing stuff through my Twitter, which I will still call it.
Yep. Forever.
It's just my name, Julia Sirmons, and you can sort of see a collection of my writing, which I will soon update at juliasirmons.com. And that's pretty much it for me.
All right, we'll be back in a couple weeks to talk about the beginning of September, and very soon with a new movie episode. Check your feeds, and until then, thanks, Julia. This was a lot of fun, and everybody else, look out for frogs. See you soon.
So we're talking